In a previous episode, we talked about Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, and we already mentioned how much he developed from his early ballet to the second one to the third one in just a very few years. So the first ballet was Firebird, in which we could hear things like very tonal, very French, early 20th century French, Ravel, Debussy, a little bit of Rimsky-Korsakov, of course, in the orchestration. And then just 2 years later, Petrushka already introduced the bitonality, which is if you take one chord like a C major, and a very distant chord like F sharp major, and you start combining them, you get a new harmonic language, a bitonality. And you can create a melody out of that in Petrushka. That's just in 2 years. And then 2 years later, yet, Rite of Spring, breaking the chains and completely new language. So what happens afterwards with Stravinsky's life? All his life until his death, is an exploring composer. He continues exploring, he's continuing to seek for new influences from the past, from maybe even from the future, from distant countries, etc., etc. So in the next years, his new obsession becomes neoclassicism, returning a little bit back to the times of Haydn and Mozart, even before that, Baroque. And I think one of the most popular pieces from the time is the Pulcinella, for example. Of course, it doesn't feel like it's related in any way to any one of the pieces we heard before, but still it has this very clear Stravinsky mark. So it's not classical, but it's a bit different. In the same time, he's writing the Concerto for piano and wind instruments, which starts with this solemn, sort of like a march. There is something very Barockian about it, about the atmosphere, the solemnity, and so on. But again, if you listen to the harmony, it's 20th century harmony, and it's very clear Stravinsky. Already in the first bar, we go from here to here. Okay, and the next chord, it's two chords at the same time. If we just play, it's fine, but he adds one more note. It's not just... So I play again the beginning. This is just the beginning. Afterwards, you get plenty of new ideas from Stravinsky, and he starts combining this solemnity, which is a little bit Barockian. There is a little bit of Russian church music in the second movement, and most prominently, once the piano starts, it becomes very jazzy, actually, very influenced by ragtime and Bach at the same time. For example, in the passage like this. See, within the counterpoint, you start hearing this accent with jazz accents, which also make it very unique. Then the second movement is started by the pianist, with very similar kind of slow solemnity. And here as well, already you can see a very clear Stravinskian language. It's a very simple melody, maybe sounds a little bit like a traditional Russian church music, a Russian religious melody. Very simple with very really minimal intervals. But there is something in the harmony which is at the same time traditional and very Stravinskian, because see if you can spot the difference. It's not this. It's this. I'll play it again, see if you can spot the difference. And Stravinsky. It's very tricky. The difference is in the bass. The bass of the chord, this is a C major, C. This is how we would usually hear a beginning of a movement in Bach's time, Haydn and so on. But Stravinsky is not using the right bass, but he's using the same note like the upper note, which gives it, which is a bit unbalanced. I won't get into it, but there's a physical explanation to all of that. But the idea is that Stravinsky really wants to put his own mark on it. So you see, the bass is always here, sort of like in midair a little bit. Even when the orchestra joins the piano, it's I think it's a wonderful movement, by the way. It's really beautiful and so original in its harmonic approach. Then the transition from the second movement to the third is almost unnoticeable, because the last bars that the piano is playing is and the last movement starts and again the ragtime. So this piece is really of a completely different style of anything we heard before by Stravinsky, and it just shows how much he still has to develop in his mind as a composer.